Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this evening of October 29th, we commemorate the one-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, which devastated the East Coast. Many are still recovering from that tragic storm, and it certainly was a major force to be reckoned with. That force of nature was at one point nearly 1,000 miles wide over the ocean front, and when it landed in southern Jersey, it was nearly 900 miles wide. It impacted so many states, 24 states in number, felt the impact of that superstorm. It was devastation to property. It was devastation to lives. 162 people in the United States lost their lives. And the fact that the storm surged to some record proportions reminds us of the impact of climate change. Now, as a member of the New York delegation in this House, my area received some mild impact from that superstorm, but ironically the year before, Hurricane Irene and Lee impacted the upstate region of New York and again devastated our area with loss of life, certainly of valuable farmland that was eroded, and the damage to communities and businesses and farm businesses across the upstate region. These are issues that are brought to mind this evening as we commemorate that one-year anniversary, as many continue to struggle to recover from the ravages of Mother Nature. The cost of climate inaction is severe. Climate change is an issue of science. It's certainly an issue of public health, and most definitely it's an issue of economics, economic vitality. Earlier, the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coalition, which is a growing number, 56 to be exact, of Democrats in the House, looking to bring about significant policy reforms that speak to the environmental and energy needs of this nation, began to provide a laser-sharp focus on the cost of climate change to our economy. In 2011 and 2012, there were some 25 extreme weather events that caused at least $1 billion each or more in damages. Total estimated economic damages were approaching $200 billion, and the cost to taxpayers some $136 billion. The cost to individual taxpayers at some totaled $1,610 million. So we know that there's a tremendous impact here that has been realized by the lack of a focus onto climate change and global warming. As we continue to look at recovery, even from Irene and Lee in the upstate New York portion, as we look at the impact, the ravages of damage that came with Superstorm Sandy, as we look at the damage recently to Colorado, and if we look at the other extreme, not rainfall and flooding, but certainly at drought, and looking at the fires, the wildfires that had consumed some states in our country, there is definitely economic consequence that comes with climate change. In my territory, in my area that is part of the 20th Congressional District, it becomes very apparent that we need to do more than just replace. If data compiled are telling us that extreme rainfall has been part of the last decade or two, wise, effective government will not merely replace, but reevaluate how to reconfigure, for instance, a bridge that may traverse one of the creeks. I know that that's the case in many locations. Looking at electric utilities, looking at what withstood the pressures of the storm, combined heat and power systems that we'll talk about during this hour, that apparently withstood greater pressure than some of the traditional systems. So we go forward with not just merely replacement, but we go forward with a renewal, a revisioning of how to take that area that was affected and make it work again. That's sound government. That's effective government. Tonight we're joined by several colleagues. We're joined by Representative Rush from the state of New Jersey, Representative Rush Holt from the state of New Jersey, and we're joined by Representative Scott Peters from the state of California. We may be visited by other colleagues this evening who are going to talk about impacts they have seen perhaps in their region and talk about the science, the economics related to climate change. And so I believe we, through SEEC, through the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coalition, have brought about the discussion, have developed the dialogue, have encouraged the moving forward, if you will, on this very important dynamic, understanding it full well so that we can move into prevention. Because the question asked here by a growing number of colleagues is how long can we afford to go without a plan of action before we understand that the cost of replacement or renewal or transformation is going to drain the taxpayers, is going to drain the individuals and families impacted, the businesses impacted, and no one wins in that scenario. So, Representative Rush Holt, if you would like to share some thoughts this evening as we begin our hour, we welcome you.
I thank my friend Mr. Tonko from New York for arranging this discussion. It is well worth recognizing the anniversary of this devastating storm because it might be said this was a storm like we've never seen before. That may be true, but I don't think it's correct to say this is a storm such as we will never see again. A year ago, Hurricane Sandy devastated New Jersey and much of the East Coast. The storm may have faded from the headlines, but New Jerseyans haven't forgotten. It is felt in a very personal and painful way by thousands and thousands of New Jerseyans yet today. And these New Jerseyans are not alone. I mean that in two senses. First, we can hear from some who are representative of the millions, but also when we hear from the younger New Jerseyans who are affected, we understand that they represent the future that will be affected by climate change. Quite simply, superstorms like Sandy are the new normal, and we'd better get used to it, even if climate change skeptics claim otherwise. I think response to Sandy means, of course, tending to the human needs of those who have been victims of the storm. But it also means making significant investments in power engineering and transportation engineering and rail engineering and wireless engineering and shoreline engineering and river flood control engineering and residential planning, and taking steps to deal with the root cause of what we see. We may not be able to stop hurricanes in their tracks. In fact, we certainly can't. But we can make sure that our infrastructure and our environment and our communities are more resilient when they strike. And if we work hard as a nation and as humanity, we may be able to stem the climate change that will result in more and more powerful superstorms. I know some in Washington are skeptical of the role of the federal government in fighting climate change, but as Sandy's $83 billion price tag should make clear, society, our economy, yes, and our government will bear the costs of climate change one way or another. And if we make the investments today, as the debts are coming due, we would do far better than to wait to pick up the pieces after other superstorms hit. And I thank my friend from New York. I'll be happy as we go along to talk about some specific New Jerseyans who were affected. I'll be happy to talk about some of the science that suggests where we are as a world. But mostly, I just want to make the point that this is the new normal that we should be prepared for.
Thank you very much, Representative Holt. And certainly your state, my home state, suffered economic consequences to the nth degree. And it's a stark reminder that the cost of inaction here is painfully borne by taxpayers into the future also. And so I'm proud of the Sikh organization, the coalition, raising the consciousness of the House as to the importance of this issue. We're joined by Representative Scott Peters from California, and Representative Peters has worked in the environmental arena and has contributed greatly in that regard. And we're proud to have you join us this evening, Representative.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tonko, and I appreciate the chance to speak to this with you on this special occasion. I'm the Climate Task Force Chair of the House Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, SEEK, and I'd rise to recognize the one-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy and to recognize those who lost their lives as well as those continuing to rebuild from the discussion. I might mention for the benefit of Mr. Holt that I am a graduate of Westfield High. I spent my high school years in New Jersey. Still have sisters in Chatham and New Providence and nieces and nephews, and visited regularly Long Beach Island, Ship Bottom, and Beach Haven for family vacations. So I know well a lot of those areas and how hard they've been hit, both from a personal and an economic standpoint. I want to speak a little bit too about San Diego, though, because my constituents in my 25-year home of San Diego have experienced and know the long rebuilding and recovery process after disaster strikes. And we have a little bit different effect from climate change and from global warming. October marks the 10-year anniversary, and I think the anniversary was 2 days ago, yesterday, of the beginning of the Cedar Fire, the largest wildfire in California history. As a San Diego City Council member at the time, I remember firsthand the destructive impact of this fire on people's lives, destroyed hundreds of homes, personal belongings and memories, and the recovery costs were in the billions of dollars. The Cedar Fire burned through 273,246 acres of San Diego County, destroyed 2,232 homes, and took 15 lives. It burned through 95 acres of the Cuyamaca State Park and blazed through 98% of its mature conifer trees. To date, little of the forest has grown back from the bare mineral soil left by the wildfire. The community faced a similar damage in 2007 during the Witch Creek Fire, and parts of the city of San Diego were also scarred at that time. Wildfires aren't new to California, but the damages from these fires are rising. And this will sound familiar when we think about the warmest years on record all being recent. In California, 12 of the 20 most damaging wildfires occurred in the last 10 years. This has huge implications for California's tourism and farming industries. For example, take the Rim Fire this summer that pushed into parts of Yosemite National Park and devastated local tourism. After the Cedar Fire, San Diego is, at the county and the city, undoubtedly more prepared and ready to respond to a large wildfire. We have better communication equipment, better communication among agencies, and better fire equipment in general. And more important, we've worked to minimize further damage through better planning. As Tom Porter, the chief of the San Diego Fire Authority, said, it's not about stopping a fire from occurring, but preventing the amount of damage it causes. Today, San Diego has new planning guidelines and building codes, 100-foot brush clearance requirements around homes. Before 2003, it was just 30 feet. And we found that we can decrease risk and save homes and lives. Resiliency starts at the local level because they know the conditions and the situations on the ground. And they're the people who can talk to the neighbors about what they have to do to be ready. We have to make our communities more resilient to wildfires, hurricanes, and other extreme weather. In the last 5 years, wildfires have cost taxpayers more than $1.6 billion a year. And last year, 9.2 million acres were burned by wildfires, which is an area bigger than the states of Delaware, Rhode Island, and Connecticut combined. In June, I introduced the bipartisan STRONG Act so the federal government can give tools for planning and resiliency to state and local actors. I think one of the first things we noticed as freshmen here was one of the first votes we were asked to take was $60 billion for Sandy relief, which was the appropriate vote to take. But we've spent more than $136 billion on relief in the last 2 years off the budget. Every dollar we spend now on disaster preparedness and resiliency, we can avoid at least $4 in future losses and FEMA expenses. We can bounce back faster with less economic damage, and each day that a community is disrupted by extreme weather, we lose economic output. So we need to be doing more to support our local communities with emergency management, communication, public health, and energy reliability in the event of an extreme weather event, whether it's a wildfire or something like Superstorm Sandy. Swiss Re, a major reinsurer, recently ranked the top 10 metro areas in North and Central America that face the highest value of working days lost from natural perils. 9 of them are in the United States. On this occasion, I commit with my colleagues to better protect my district from the devastation caused by extreme weather by working to rebuild stronger and smarter with a mind for the future. And again, thank you very much for inviting me. I'd be happy to discuss some of these items.
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Peters. We're also joined by Representative Denny Heck from Washington State, who is a freshman but has brought a very strong voice of advocacy for the environment to this chamber. And we're proud to have him join us this evening and raise again the dialogue that's so essential about climate change, global warming, and the economic impact that every region across this country is experiencing. So welcome, Representative Heck, and thank you for being such an outstanding advocate.
Well, thank you, sir, and thank you for the privilege of being able to add my voice to this. Also, as a member of the House Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, I stand here today as well to recognize the 1-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy and remember all those whose lives were lost and all those left behind who are in the process of continuing to rebuild their lives from that destruction, not just in the months ahead, but undoubtedly in the years ahead. Our nation must, it can, it will, and it should stand with those families and businesses as they undertake that task all along the Atlantic coast as they seek to recover. I actually come from about as far away from that in the continental United States as possible. I'm from Washington State, and so the district that I have the honor to represent was not directly affected by Superstorm Sandy. However, my district has begun to feel the very real effects of climate change. Science has shown that climate change is driving an ongoing decrease in seawater pH. Scientists refer to this as ocean acidification. So you might ask, how does that happen? And truthfully, and with all due respect to my colleague from New Jersey, you don't have to be a Jeopardy champion to get this. In fact, you only need be exposed to a junior high or senior high level biology or chemistry course. It only stands to reason that as more and more carbon is emitted into the atmosphere, not all of it goes into the atmosphere, but in fact, a goodly portion of it is absorbed by what covers approximately 3/4 of our little globe's surface, namely the ocean. And that carbon being absorbed into the ocean does in fact affect the pH level. Ocean acidification, in turn, affects marine life in a lot of different ways. But the effect of that I am the most familiar with is the damage that it causes to shellfish. including the shellfish grown at farms in my district, specifically in Mason County. Indeed, I'm proud to tell you that the largest shellfish farm in America, Taylor Shellfish Farm, is located, along with many others, in the 10th Congressional District of Washington State. And the acidity in the water, the direct result of carbon emission into the atmosphere absorbed by the ocean, makes it difficult for the shellfish to grow and harden their shells, and frankly decreases survival rates. It makes it harder to raise shellfish. Well, more than 3,200 people in our state, a lot of them in my district, are employed directly or indirectly in the shellfish industry and by growers. The estimated total economic contribution is well over $250 million. But that entire industry is threatened by ocean acidification resulting from climate change. And it is totally threatened by this. I've said here on this floor and elsewhere many times that a healthy economy is completely dependent and requires a healthy environment. The effect of climate change on Washington State's shellfish industry is but one of the clearest examples of that fact. Now, Washington State has a climate change adaptation strategy that we're working on with our regional neighbors, and I might add with some degree of progress. But without the involvement at the federal level and with the federal government, our plan isn't going to be successful. Reason? This is a global problem. It will require global action. And global action is only going to occur if the United States leads, which it has so often in the past. And so, sir, on this occasion, the one-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, I also commit to better protecting the district I represent, our nation, and the planet from the devastating effects of climate change. We've been waiting long enough. The science is in, and it is time to act. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative Heck. We have also been joined by yet another freshman member of the House, this time from the state of Pennsylvania, another strong friend of the environment, a person who has spent much of his career defending the environment. Representative Matt Cartwright joins us this evening, and welcome and thank you for participating with the Seek Coalition.
It's my pleasure, my dear friend and colleague from New York. It's almost hard to believe, I would say, that we are noting the one-year anniversary of the terrible storm we call Hurricane Sandy striking our nation's shores. It seems like no more than 6 or 7 months ago that all happened, and maybe one of the reasons is that it was so horrific, so damaging, so devastating that the harm continues. There are still families searching for a place to live. There are still Americans still digging out from this problem, trying to salvage the situation for themselves and their families. And so it's almost hard to believe that it was a full year ago that this happened. You know, this is a country that suffered so much in loss because of Hurricane Sandy. $25 billion in business losses, $50 billion in property damage. I come from Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, so far as it is from the seacoast, we still had 1.2 million residents lose electricity during that event. And in my own district, up in the hills of the 17th District of Pennsylvania, we still lost power for 53,000 residents. And indeed, I'm so sorry to say that we had several lives lost in my district due to Hurricane Sandy. People who perished because of falling tree limbs, because of hypothermia due to exposure. We had somebody we lost because of exposure to carbon monoxide because of generator fumes that were emitted during the blackout. And we had tens of thousands of homes and businesses damaged in my district because of Hurricane Sandy. So don't think we didn't notice it either, and don't think we didn't pay attention to the sufferings of all of the other Americans because of Hurricane Sandy. There's no denying that there is climate change. There's just no denying it. We can argue all day about what's causing it and what to do about it, but there's no denying that it's happening and that it's resulting in more and more frequent weather events like this, more and more severe weather events like this. There's no denying that these things are happening, and there's no denying the damage and harm that comes to our nation as a result. In 2011 and 2012, there were 25 severe weather events that caused $1 billion or more in damage each. 25 of them in a 2-year span. The total price tag for that, $188 billion in property damage to our nation. And damage to the taxpayers. The taxpayers had to pick up $136 billion of those losses because that's what we do in emergency relief and in flood insurance and in crop insurance. These weather events cost taxpayers money. You know, we have something in the legislature called the GAO. And the GAO used to stand for the General Accounting Office. In 2004, we changed the name to the General Accountability Office, better to reflect the mission of that office, accountability, proper husbanding of the assets and the resources of the federal government. And they keep track of these things, and every year they come out with something that they call the GAO High Risk Report. And now the GAO High Risk Report is a compilation of all of the risks to the assets and the finances that we have in this nation as part of our government. It's a list of the things that threaten the assets of the federal government. And for the first time this year, earlier this year, the GAO High Risk Report included climate change as a reason for risk to American government's assets. This is not just about security. It's not just about infrastructure. It's not just about damage to agriculture. It's not just about risk to the health and the well-being of all of Americans. It's also about financial losses to the American federal government. Because after all, we are an insurance company. We are a government that insures against flood. We're a government that insures against crop damage. We do that. It's something that we've thought about, something that makes sense for our nation, but we end up in the position of an insurance company, and we end up paying the price tag when these storms happen. And the GAO recognizes that and recognizes that climate change is a major driver in the risks to the American finances as a result of these programs that we do. As a result of all of that, in a few months, I will be introducing a comprehensive climate adaptation bill. Because again, we can argue till the cows come home about what causes climate change, and what the effects of it are, but one thing that can't be denied, and that the GAO doesn't even deny, that this costs American taxpayers money, and the best way to handle that is to plan for it. And so, with the support of the White House, I will be introducing a comprehensive climate adaptation bill later this year. It should be out in a few months. And so on this, the 1-year anniversary of the horrible tragedy that was Hurricane Sandy, we remember the devastation, we remember the losses, we remember the loss of life, and we remember the communities that are continuing to struggle with the damage that was caused by that storm. And I say it's time for us also to plan for the future to minimize these losses that will continue to happen as the climate continues to change. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, the representative talks about the growing acknowledgement by agencies and various elements of government. And I can tell you also that a personal experience watching the constituents in our area understand more starkly and painfully the impact of global warming in the aftermath of Irene and Lee. And Representative Peters has long promoted the awareness concept, wanting people to understand the awareness of global warming, climate change, and your thoughts on that.
Just to follow on, it's remarkable. I think what Mr. Cartwright said is exactly right. We don't know that our house is going to burn down, yet we buy fire insurance because we know that there's a risk of it. And I often hear in this building, unfortunately, a lot of professed doubt about climate change. But even taking that, even though I disagree with it, I think the science is pretty clear. If you doubt it, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. That doesn't mean you don't prepare for it, you don't plan for it, you don't make the investments to be more resilient, which is what the STRONG Act is about. And so I completely agree. In the face of doubt, that doubt should not equal inaction. The fact that we have these strong evidence that this is happening, that we've had these off-budget expenses, is every reason in the world we need here to plan. And I would say to folks listening at home is that they need to get in touch with people in this body to let them know that. One thing I would just add briefly about what we did in San Diego. I was chair of a volunteer group, climate initiative, which was part of the San Diego Foundation's effort to do civic engagement. And what we tried to do was through philanthropy to provide good support for decision making locally around climate, because a lot of the leadership, as you know, Mr. Tonko, is happening at the local level. And we provided research on science. We did a study of what the major climate effects in San Diego would be, which are wildfires, more intense wildfires, water supply threats, and sea level rise. No surprise to anyone here. And we were able to give that information to our elected officials so that they knew what we were dealing, what we had to plan with locally. We also did a public opinion survey just to let them know what people thought, and it turned out that people in San Diego wanted to be leaders on climate action. They wanted, first of all, they wanted to be leaders in the state, but they also didn't want the jobs associated with the industrial opportunities to be going to China or Texas. So we were able to arm our electeds with that information and made them a lot bolder, frankly, about taking the actions that we needed to take. I bet the people in this body would benefit from the same kind of information and wouldn't be surprised that America is behind us in taking action, particularly on getting ready and being resilient and being prepared to save money down the road. No one likes spending $134 billion off budget. I certainly didn't. I know my colleagues don't. And there's no need to do that. We can be prepared. And again, thank you very much for scheduling this hour.
Thank you very much, Representative Peters. And the gentleman makes mention of awareness, and there are many visuals out there that strike awareness even a coast away. And Representative Holt, I've just noticed recently in the news the reopening of the boardwalk, the very famous traditional boardwalk in your home state as you continue to recover from the damages of Superstorm Sandy. The awareness is an amazing piece of the action here, and something as visible and understandable as that boardwalk brings it home for many people far removed from New Jersey.
Some of the repair has taken place, but the recovery takes a very long time. Today, 3 New Jerseyans came to visit me. One, Eric from Jersey City, had been ready to open his bakery with his wife when Sandy hit. And the bakery was flooded by 6 feet of water, a lot of equipment was damaged, and it delayed until fairly recently the opening of that bakery. And of course, there was the loss of income to that family. Norma from Seaside Park was displaced by severe flooding, nearly 4 feet. And, we can talk about the depth of the storm surge or the record low barometric pressure or what the wind speed was. We mustn't lose sight of the people who were affected here. Norma had space in her home that was flooded, and so she lost the rental income for that space and is still cleaning up. Incidentally, she's a science supervisor in a local school and is now talking personally about climate change and extreme weather. And April from Jersey City is a single mother of a child with asthma, was uprooted because of the flooding from Sandy. She's now dealing with mold issues in her child's school as a result of the flooding. And she's gotten involved in helping low-income families recover from Sandy. And I want to make this point about who is hurt the most. Researchers at Rutgers University in New Jersey looked at families that are employed but that are struggling. These would be asset-limited people who are earning but barely earning a living, which makes up really about a third of New Jerseyans. They have no cushion. And yet they incurred, about a third of New Jerseyans incurred more than half of the residential damage, the cost, and are obtaining only about a quarter, slightly more than a quarter, of the resources that are available for rebuilding. So low-income families who tend to have less safe, less resilient housing are the ones that suffer the most damage. Many who work hourly jobs are less able to deal with the loss of wages that occur from these disasters. And many of them were underinsured, and about 90% did not have flood insurance. So it's only a fraction of the people in New Jersey, but it is a very large fraction of the people who suffered the really severe damage. And as bad as this is in America, the effects of climate change are even worse in developing countries around the world. Developing nations are more vulnerable to crop failure. Tropical diseases are very sensitive to climate change. So malaria and dengue fever and diarrheal disease are more prevalent now because of climate change, and developing nations are less able to afford the damage that results. I got in some trouble earlier this year. Well, I was challenged earlier this year when I said, we've got to deal with climate change or millions will die. Well, in fact, I looked it up. The World Health Organization estimates that climate change is already causing 140,000 deaths per year, more than would have occurred without the climate change, primarily in developing countries. So it doesn't take very many years before, indeed, millions are dying. That is something of the human cost of what we're talking about.
Right. And in every measurement that we make, there's a huge impact that climate change calculates to the negative. You talk about the impact worldwide. It's the sightings of a perfect storm with less available land as it erodes with these floodings, and a growing population worldwide. That is, the formation of a perfect storm. But when we look closer to home in these United States, you and I are part of delegations that represent coastal states. And the coastal erosion and the erosion of valuable farmland in my district are realities. And it's measurable already. And the forewarnings are out there to take action to prevent further erosion. And when you think of that impact, it comes in several dimensions, perhaps agricultural in nature as a major sector of our economy in this country, or in tourism. One of the bits of erosion that I saw, one of the impacts that came, was with tourism infrastructure. Very valuable historic sites that were nearly ruined, that are along the beds of creeks and rivers, that are tourism destinations, that now are shut for business as they get repaired. So some of these elements are extremely delicate and part of our fabric as a nation to be able to share our sense of history with either other people of the United States or with visitors that travel to this land. So there are impacts that come. And I would also talk about the infrastructure impacts on the energy side. We witnessed situations where some fared better than others. And I was proud of our SEEK organization. You and I are longtime members, charter members of SEEK, and I'm proud of the fact that we called upon the Sandy Rebuilding Task Force to help communities rebuild stronger and smarter by having the task force issue guidance for combined heat and power, CHP systems. Those systems fared well in areas ravaged by these superstorms. CHP, as many know, is an innovative sort of concept, an energy efficient method for generating electricity and harnessing heat. The thermal energy that accompanies that. In CHP systems, heat that normally is wasted, allowed to escape, is captured and recovered as useful energy. And that allows us to require and perhaps promote this integrated concept approach for far more efficient than conventional power generation would be. Conventional methods have a typical combined efficiency of 45%, while CHP can operate as high as 80%. This technology is not only efficient, it also has demonstrated resiliency to extreme weather events. And I can cite South Oaks Hospital on Long Island, a hospital facility that includes an acute psychiatric hospital, a nursing home, and an assisted living center. During the storm and its aftermath, the hospital maintained full power through the use of its 1.3 megawatt CHP system. So again, lessons hopefully will be learned. So as we go to replace, we also have to transition some of our thinking and make certain that we're building systems that will be able to endure these storms into the future. And certainly amongst our priorities has got to be this all-out effort to combat global warming, climate change, to make certain that we do all of our preventative measures, and then when we rebuild, do it in a way that is efficient, so that sound government, smart government, is the tool that's reached to, rather than awkwardly replacing in a sort of rush order to get us back to working into a working progressive outcome, but where we haven't addressed some of the dynamics of the ravages of weather, which is teaching us several lessons as we go through these many storms. So you're absolutely right. The people are the most impacted here. We have to keep them front and center in our thinking, but all these services that either provide jobs for people, provide economic opportunities, economic growth, or meet their public safety needs or their energy needs, their household needs, their business needs, all have got to be brought into this calculus that is adjusting the concepts based on the theory of climate change, and where we again underscore the importance of prevention.
If the gentleman would yield.
Absolutely, Representative Holt.
Mr. Speaker, I want to make sure that all of our colleagues understand that when my friend from New York talks in the details about new energy systems, he's talking about human welfare. He's talking about addressing the human cost that we were speaking of earlier. In other words, it is not just a matter of providing energy for people to power our economy and provide comfortable daily lives. It is also a matter of doing it in a way that avoids this enormous human cost from climate change. The way we produce and use energy is the greatest insult to our planet. And it is changing our very climate, and we must address that. The sooner we address it, the more effective we will be at addressing it, the more of these costs we can avoid. It is unmistakable, unequivocal, that global warming has taken place and is taking place. Just in the past month, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out with their 5th very carefully prepared report. It says that global temperatures are likely to rise from 1/3 of a degree to 4.5 degrees roughly Celsius, that sea levels will rise. It is certain that the upper ocean has already warmed over the last 3 decades. It is certain that the upper ocean has already absorbed carbon dioxide, making it more acidic, as we heard from our friends earlier. And most of the aspects of climate change will continue for centuries, with resultant costs in lives and dollars, if the CO2 emissions aren't brought under control. And in fact, some of these costs will be incurred now, even if we bring CO2 emissions under control, because of the damage already done. But it is important to emphasize that it comes down to the human cost. That's what we mustn't forget in all the charts and graphs and scientific discussions of the causes and effects of climate change.
Well, you know, I think it's very important for us to recognize, too, that here this evening you and several of our colleagues and I have shared thoughts about painful consequences in our given region, or have talked about not only flooding, but drought situations, wildfires. We've talked about the economics, the economic impact of climate change with these associated storms. We have talked about the recovery efforts. We have talked about Superstorm Sandy on this 1-year commemoration date, still finding its neighborhoods, its communities, its people, its businesses, its farming communities still struggling to recover. We've talked about all of this, and now I think we need to close in the remaining minutes we have in this hour to talk about a plan of action. Now, SEEC, the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coalition, is a growing number of representatives, 56 strong as we speak. Individuals are talking about the consciousness, raising the consciousness, talking about awareness out there in the community, but there's also a requirement for legislative action. Absent that, we move to an executive order, and some have expressed concern about that, but leaving no other option available, the chief executive, the president, has moved to resolve some of these concerns through organizations like and agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency. And so I think there needs to be this dialogue here and in the United States Senate, working with the president, with the White House and the administration to develop a sound package of legislation that allows us to go forward. It is apparent after the number of stories heard here just this evening and the personal anecdotes that you shared, Representative Holt, about people from New Jersey and the pain that they endure, that should motivate us to move forward with a plan of action, understanding that the cost of inaction is very, very heavy. Many have placed threshold dates out there. They're not that far into the future, 2017, 2020, some say at the latest. It is our stewardship that is called upon. We inherited this environment, this earth, from ancestors who preceded us, and now it is our challenge, I believe, to hand that to next generations unborn in even better working order. And, you know, with the growth worldwide of population, with the industrialization of many third world nations, the reach to automobiles being put on the highways around the world, the development of power supplies around the world are causing this huge growth of challenge in terms of carbon emission and eventually methane that will destroy antibodies out there. So the challenge is before us, and I think we need to go forward with a very focused effort of policy development that can be done in the very near future here in the House. Avoiding that, walking away from it, denying it, ought to be revisited by those who have suffered heavily from the damages of these storms. And certainly as we focus on Superstorm Sandy this evening, on that one storm here, it's brought to mind many, many situations where people are still suffering. Blocks destroyed by fires in Superstorm Sandy that destroyed neighborhoods. We have a challenge before us, Representative Holt.
The work of the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coalition here in Congress is to see that we can move into the future in a sustainable way. It is completely appropriate that we talk about both energy and environment in this same, really with the same breath. Because, as I said, the way we produce and use energy is the greatest insult to our planet. But it is possible to produce and use energy that will power our economy and provide a good quality of life for 10 billion people in the world if we're smart and if we get to work now. We can do it in a way that doesn't ruin the world and condemn all of these billions of people to the kinds of superstorms, the kinds of effects of climate change and spreading diseases and so forth that will result if climate change runs amok. New Jerseyans need no further reminder that climate change is real. Evidently, some of our colleagues here do need that reminder. And this year, 1 year after Hurricane Sandy, we are here to tell our friends, to tell our colleagues, this is for real. This is serious, and we should get to work. The work of the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coalition is dedicated to that work, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Tonko of New York, for his work to propel the SEEK coalition.
Well, thank you, Representative Holt. We'll close by just focusing in on this graphic, which showed the enormity, the immense breadth and depth of this Superstorm Sandy. Many didn't relate that storm to a huge tide coming in. And for any of us who've jumped into the ocean, we know the power of a tide. But to have the highest storm surge ever measured, recorded at Kings Point, New York, highest ever recorded at 14.38 feet, tells a story. The fact that the tide, the water level at Battery Park in Lower Manhattan, reached 9.1 feet above the average high tide line. Think of it. 1 inch, 2 inches, a foot of water additional that comes into a flood zone calculates that much more damage. Here, what we had with the situation were records beyond 9 feet, approaching 10 feet, a storm surge of 14.38 feet. We're talking monumental damage. We're talking about a force that swept away lives, a force that sparked fires in neighborhoods, a force that wiped out businesses and found neighborhoods still vacant. A silence that has befallen these given communities because of the ravages of Mother Nature that can be prevented if we put our minds and hearts and efforts into that concept of being better stewards of the environment. This is a place where a plan of action can take hold. In these halls of government, leadership is called upon. A moral compass points in the direction of us being sounder friends of the environment and protectionists when it comes to getting things done so as to avoid the high scale of economic destruction that has gripped our communities. I still see it in the aftermath of Irene and Lee in the 20th Congressional District of New York. Damage done in 2011 is still causing hardship in 2013. Impacted by all sorts of weather events that are atypical of our region. Tropical storms, hurricanes, tornadoes that wiped through the area. and required all sorts of volunteerism to enter in, and certainly dollars that were shared from private sector sources and from FEMA at the federal level and various other programs at the federal government. It will be an exhausting situation that will continue to drain the taxpayers as we move forward if we don't take action. On this very solemn day of commemoration, as we call to mind all of the destruction that came into 24 states a year ago this evening, should be all the call to action that is required of us. Since then, it's been followed by devastation in Colorado, wildfires in the Southwest, and predictions that more and more damage will be part and parcel to a future that is allowed to go forward without the soundness of stewardship of the environment that ought to be a high priority in this House, in the United States Senate, and certainly across this nation. Sound leadership begins with the acknowledgement that there is a challenge out there, and that the challenge is then met with accurate and detailed information exchange that builds a dialogue that creates a package of response that indicates that we are a compassionate, caring, loving people in this nation that through the halls of this House can provide hope for this environment and hope to families who have suffered the consequences, and hope to generations unborn as we pass to them a stronger sense of stewardship of this earth. So it's been our pleasure to, in this hour, to have shared many of our ideas, many of our concerns, many of the anecdotal bits that personalize the given situation for far too many, and we're thankful for the opportunity. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.